Hey everyone, today we are going to be talking about absolute value. Absolute value is so important for so many things, but it's a pretty easy concept. So, just as a warm-up, I want you to pause the video. Remember, you're being an active learner, you're taking notes, you're doing the activities, you're not just watching me do them. And I want you to do these 3 problems, please. Alright, so this is what I decided to use. I decided to use -4 and 4. And the relationship between them is they're opposites because they're both 4 units away from 0 but in opposite directions. So how do they relate to 0? They're both 4 units away but in opposite directions. Okay, so let's start with our new vocabulary, and that is absolute value. Absolute value. So the absolute value of 10, for example, is written like this. So when you see 2 lines that are up and down, straight up and down with a number in between, this is the symbol for absolute value. So the absolute value of 10 is written like this. On this number line, we're going to count the number of units from 10 to 0. And I think you know that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 10 is 10. So the absolute value of a number is just the distance between that number and 0 on the number line. So the next question is, what other number has an absolute value of 10? What other number is 10 units away? And this is pretty easy. It would be -10. -10. And why? Because when we count the number of units, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 units away. So we can say the absolute value of -10 is 10, because the absolute value is just the distance between the number and 0. So the distance between -10 and 0 is 10. Okay, so now let's complete the chart. I'll do the first one with you, and then I want you to pause and do the last 2 alone. So number is -6. So I'm going to find it on my number line, which is right here, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units away from 0. So the absolute value of -10 is 6. And a different number with the same absolute value is, if I go the other direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is going to be 6. So start thinking, how do these 2 numbers relate to one another? I think this is pretty easy. I hope you guys, it seems common sense to me. Okay, so pause it and do these next 2. All right, how did you do? 8 is 8 units away from 0, as is -8. And here's my number line diagram to show that. Oops, I wrote that wrong. The absolute value of -1 is 1 because it is 1 unit away from 0. And the other number that is 1 unit away from 0 is a positive 1. And I'm hoping that you see that each of these numbers are opposites. So opposites have the same absolute value. I also hope that you notice that all of the absolute values are positive, because we're only talking about the distance away from 0, not the direction. So there's another word, magnitude, that you might see in math problems, and it just means the quantity found by taking the absolute value of the numerical part. So if Mrs. Owens received a call that her bank checkbook balance was -45, what is the magnitude of the overdrawn? What is the magnitude of the amount overdrawn? So what it's asking is, How much overdrawn is she? She is $45 in the hole. She's $45 in the hole. So we just took the absolute value of that, and that's the magnitude. So she's $45 in the hole. Or you could say withdrawn, or she's overdrawn by $45. So for each scenario below, use absolute value to determine the magnitude. So again, the magnitude is just another way of saying the absolute value. It's a way that we can describe the number. So Maria was sick with the flu and her weight changed as a result, represented by -4 pounds. So we know that she lost 4 pounds. So how much weight did she lose? She lost 4 pounds. Jeffrey owes his friend $5. So how much is Jeffrey's debt? His debt is $5. Now, if we were going to write it as an integer, we would say it's -5. But we want to know how much is his debt. His debt is $5. The elevation of Niagara Falls is 326 feet. How far is this above sea level? Now, in past assignments, it asked for the integer. So the integer would be 326. But now we want to know the magnitude. So the magnitude, how far above it from sea level? How far is this above sea level? It's 326 feet above sea level. All right, Meg is playing a card game. They have positive and negative numbers on them, and Meg exclaims, "The absolute value of my number equals 8. What is the number on Meg's card?" So pause, think about this for a second. Well, if the absolute value is 8, is there only one number that it could be? Or, if you think of the number line, are there two numbers that are 8 away? So, I would say, if this was a question, I would say, we do not know for sure, but it could be the card could be an 8 or a -8. We don't know for sure. So we don't know for sure because both absolute values equal 8. So again, notice I just didn't say we don't know, or I didn't say 8 or -8. I explained we don't know for sure because both absolute values equal 8. So make sure that you're communicating your thoughts precisely. Okay, so this one I like. It's going to take some thought. You've got to really think about what is being said here. You might have to read it a few times. Carl said 2 integers can have the same absolute value. 2 integers can have the same absolute value. But Angela said 1 integer can have 2 absolute values. Who is right? And defend your answer. So, I want you to think about this carefully. Can 2 integers have the same absolute value? Or can 1 integer have 2 absolute values? So you have to think about what that absolute value means. It means the distance from 0. So if we had 1 integer, let's say it's -4. Could we have 2 different values showing the distance from 0? So if I use this number line, -4, no matter what, is going to be 4 away from 0. So I know that Angela is not correct because she's saying that this can be have two different values showing the distance from 0. So let's think about what Carl said. He said two integers can have the same absolute value. So let's think about the 8 that we were using before. If the absolute value of the number is 8, are there two things that could have, so two integers that could have this same absolute value? Well, we just talked about how 8 could have the absolute value of 8 could be 8. Sorry, I said that wrong. If you had a number whose absolute value is 8, that number could be 8 or negative 8. So I agree with Carl. All right, Jamie told his math teacher, give me any absolute value and I can tell you two numbers that have that absolute value. Is she correct? For any given absolute value, will there always be two numbers that have that absolute value? So for any given absolute value, will there always be two numbers that have that absolute value? So I want you to think about this, and I want you to show on the number line if you think it is true or not. So what we know is a number and its opposite always have the same absolute value. So these two would have the same absolute value, and 2 and 2 would have the same because it's 2 away. So negative 2 and 2 would have the same. Negative 8 is 8 away, and 8 is 8 away. So I agree that a number and its opposite have the same absolute value, but getting back to this one, what about 0? What's 0's absolute value? That's just 0. And you don't have another number that is 0 away. So she is correct except for 0. All right, that's absolute value in a nutshell. So start your assignment and check in with me if you have questions. We out.